So what you can take from this concept is that we have both linear structures as well as cyclic compounds where you have a ring structure. And between both, these compounds are exactly the same regarding the number of hydrogens and the number of carbons, but the way that they're put together is the only difference that you're going to see between them. And then the ring structure is the most common structure that we would see in nature. Okay, so like I said, just kind of revisit the idea of what exactly biochemistry is. Biochemistry is the study of biology by examining the chemical elements that make up the structures of the units that are associated with life. So we think specifically about the structure of a cell, where you have essentially organelles and cytoplasm surrounded by a cell membrane. All of the materials in the cell are made of chemical elements at the molecular level. And then even within that cell, you also have these various processes that operate on molecular compounds in order for those processes to be generated. So it's kind of like you have chemicals surrounding chemicals surrounding chemicals, and then all of this machinery just functions together, and it enables life, which is very, very interesting. So biochemistry, again, is the study of all the chemical attributes that are involved in comprising living organisms. So one term that you'll probably hear me use throughout this lecture is that of biomolecules, which these particular biomolecules are going to be, the primary ones we're concerned with are the proteins, the carbohydrates, the lipids, proteins, carbohydrates, and the nucleic acids. So those are the four primary biomolecules, and the bigger the biomolecule is, we refer to it as a macromolecule, which just means it's a large molecule. So an example of that would be something like starch, which is a very large polysaccharide. Now, a smaller biomolecule would be something like this glucose structure, which is presented right here. And glucose is a very important carbohydrate source that our cells use in order to generate ATP, so that way your cells have energy to them. All these macromolecules are biomolecules, and all of these molecules are involved in the structure of the cell as well as cell processes. So again, the four key primary molecules that we're going to be talking about in terms of biochemistry will be the carbohydrates, the lipids, proteins, and then the nucleic acids. There are some smaller molecules, as I said, that are they play more of a role. And first of all, most of these are primarily structural molecules. Nucleic acids make up our DNA. Proteins help to build things like the cell membrane as well as organelle structures. Lipids help to kind of reinforce structures where we have proteins embedded. So primarily the key attribute that comes to mind would be that of the cell membrane, which is comprised of phospholipid bilayer, which helps to repel water and helps the cell to retain water. And then we have carbohydrates, which are pretty much used all over, as well as to generate energy for the cell. Now, though we have these giant macromolecules that play a role in the structure of cells for living organisms, there's also, some smaller molecules such as vitamins, enzymes. Vitamins are used to enhance metabolic activity for a cell. Enzymes are used to expedite the process of chemical reactions, or the processes of different metabolic activities that take place within a cell. So they're known as catalysts. But enzymes in their truest sense are really just proteins that have a specific shape and they have a specific function, which is to, again, increase the rate of a reaction. Hormones are also proteins. These are examples pretty much. These also help to assist different processes that take place in our body. Hormones can induce growth and development, and in a sense they also kind of act as an enzyme in the sense that they're catalyzing, the process of growth and development on a very broad spectrum kind of level. And then energy carrying molecules, primarily in the form of adenosine triphosphate. This is your ATP. ATP is kind of the fuel that's used by all cells in order to get all of these processes going. So all of these molecules work together and really are a part of this large machinery that enable the cell to be alive and to function. Because without ATP, there isn't any energy. There's no energy working, there's no DNA replication, so then you just essentially have nucleic acid just kind of hanging out inside of a nucleus. You have proteins just hanging out in places, but without ATP, none of these biomolecules get generated or replicated to continue the life of the cell. So where do we get all of our biomolecules from? Well, this is kind of like we have to continually replenish these molecules because our cells, they need to be exposed and they need to have nutrients that will be able to diffuse through the cell and help the cell to grow and develop. So proteins need to come into the cell. Carbohydrates need to come into the cell. Carbohydrates are among some of the most important because when we break down a carbohydrate, we split it into two sugars, or we basically split a cyclic glucose ring structure into two small sugar complexes, and then those two small carbohydrates get broken down further in the process of cell respiration. And then the very end product of that is the generation of ATP to, again, perpetuate life. So anytime we digest or eat food, we're continually extracting carbohydrates from the chicken that we eat. Carbohydrates, primarily, you would take it from maybe like bread or so. Chicken would be more so protein. But carbohydrates we're going to get from substances that primarily contain sugars. So you can extract carbohydrates from French fries, things that have, a high concentration of starch to them. At the same time, you're also extracting fats from food that you eat. So much of the food that we eat, we tend to cook in oil or have, base stuff in oil. So that provides us with fat. And then a lot of foods also have their own natural fats to them. So after we cook them, those all get transferred to our own cells once we ingest them. Nucleic acids are also extracted, especially to anything that has been derived from plant material or derived from an animal source. Fungal sources, you can also get nucleic acids, algae sources, which in a sense are kind of protists. But anything we eat, that has come from a living organism is also going to provide us with nucleic acids. And then proteins, we get most of our proteins from meats. You can also get proteins from beans, and then some other substitutes for those of you that don't eat meat, or protein substitutes like you can have. So when all of these different biomolecules are ingested by us, they all get broken down. We mechanically break them down when they reach our oral cavity. So we do a lot of crunching with our teeth. We do a lot of food manipulation with our tongue. And all that helps to break down the components of the food that we eat. So once that takes place, your food makes its way down the esophagus, where it's being exposed to a lot of secretions that help to make the food easier for the body to digest and get ready for absorption. It makes its way down to the stomach, where it is exposed to acids, so the pH level of the environment where this food has found itself is now dropped drastically to a pH of about 1. You also have lots of enzymes in that environment, and they just go to work breaking down all of these, all the component molecular structures of the food, so that way they can be small enough to enter into our cells. And then when that happens, our own bodies are able to absorb these nutrients. And microorganisms do the same thing. It's just that, you know, some microorganisms can ingest food, kind of like we do. But then we have things like bacteria who don't necessarily ingest food through the process of mechanical manipulation, but they can release enzymes into the environment or to the food substrate they're trying to break down. And then once that food is broken down, they can extract nutrients, or allows those nutrients to diffuse into the cell. And once the nutrients are available to the cell, then they are used for all the metabolic reactions that the cell needs in order to survive, so that way it can proliferate and grow and develop, spread its genes to its daughter cell offspring, and just enable kind of the survival of its own species, which, you know, in the scientific literature, I mean, a lot of the idea behind why life exists is really because we have this selfish gene theory where life wants to generate life. So that should be like the ultimate, according to Richard Dawkins, if any of you know who he is. He's a big component of the selfish gene theory, that all organisms, and they don't know this consciously, but the goal of all organisms is to essentially just pass on your genetic material. Extracting nutrients is essential because that enables the survival of the cell, and it enables the cell to proliferate, grow, develop, and replicate. Okay? So this is just kind of an image of, you know, what I was talking about with having the digestion of food products. So we eat things, we mechanically manipulate them with our teeth and with our tongue. They make their way down our esophagus. Your esophagus also helps to crush up and soften the food bolus that you're digesting. It makes its way down into your intestines, and then as it goes through your intestines, it goes down to your stomach, and also is exposed to enzymes as well as a very low pH level to help further break down the food, and then it passes through the intestinal tract all the way out to being exited. And what you can see here is just, you know, how nutrients are transferred and pass through the gut. And really the way that happens is that you just simply, as you're breaking down this food, the cells have these microvilli next to them, or that line them, and the microvilli can trap these nutrients. So once the nutrients are trapped in the microvilli, they will pass through the cells, and once they're passing through and basically being pushed into the tissue of the gut, they'll make their way to our capillary beds. And then in our capillary beds, you know, they can go throughout our entire body system, and make their way to the cells that need these particular nutrients. So let's kind of first talk about, you know, let's kind of delve into more about these biomolecules that are really important to us. So like I said before, glucose is among one of the most important, primarily the cyclic structure, which is C6H12O6. So without glucose, we basically don't have any energy. If our glucose levels are down, you don't have a lot of cells metabolizing things, you don't have a lot of ATP generated, your body's going to be very, very sluggish. And the same thing goes for other organisms that rely on the process of cell respiration to generate ATP. Without energy, you can't function. So the particular ratio that carbohydrates exist in is a ratio of 1 to 2 to 1. And what that means is that you have 1 carbon for every 2 hydrogen for every 1 oxygen. Okay, so if you look here, you have carbon 6, H12O6, but when we reduce that to, this particular molecule can be reduced to a ratio of 1 to 2 to 1, because 6 can be divided into 12, and when it is, we get 2. So 6 divided by 6 is 1, so that makes carbon 1, to hydrogen 2 to oxygen 2. So it's just simple reduction of math to figure out if that ratio exists. So if you don't have a 1 to 2 to 1, then you may not have, you know, a true carbohydrate. So we have a number of examples that we continually address. We have glucose, we have fructose, we have sucrose, lactose, maltose, starch, cellulose, and glycogen. Now, when you look at these terms, you probably heard these in a good majority of places before.